Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Edith Harris Lecture on Disability Justice. I'm Cheryl Kubiak. I'm the Dean of the School of Social Work, and I want to invite all of you to full participation in today's Fireside Chat. Disability justice is often left out of our discussions on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we are here today to give witness to the importance of this inclusion. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors and go over a few housekeeping items. It's often said that it takes a village, and this event is no exception. I want to give thanks to the colleges and institutes and the Provost's office here at Wayne State for their contributions to the event. And a big shout out to our partner from Detroit Disability Power. So thank you all for the help and support for the event. A couple of reminders in terms of our students and those seeking continuing education credits. Please write your full name in the chat so that we can record that. I also want to introduce our two ASL speakers that will be on the screen throughout. Rachel and Mary, and they will be transferring this role every 15 minutes, but they will be here throughout the duration of today's event. So now I'd like to introduce our provost for the welcome. Mark Kornblue has been our provost since July, so he's fairly new in his role, and he is the senior vice president for academic affairs and a professor. He comes to us from the University of Kentucky, where he was the dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. But he's no stranger to Michigan. He was at Michigan State University from 1994 to 2009. He's quite a scholar in his area of history, and I would welcome him to say a few words today. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Cheryl. So it's a pleasure to welcome everyone here to this event. The Wayne State University is exceptionally proud of our School of Social Work. It's a long-standing history, 86 years of training social workers and supporting social justice in the state of Michigan. And it's just a pleasure to see the commitment of our School of Social Work to disability justice. Events like this one are part of an ongoing effort to help people understand how important disability justice is. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for supporting the College of Social Work. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. I'm certainly looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Now I'd like to introduce the person who's going to introduce our speakers, Susan Duhat. Susan is a woman who has disabilities herself and has been the executive director of the Center for Independence for the Disabled in New York City. Susan has a long history of helping others through her advocacy and grassroots campaigns, legislative initiatives, lawsuits to enforce civil rights in the area of emergency preparedness, transportation access, voting rights, and homelessness. Susan also is no stranger to Detroit. She's got some hometown credibility as the daughter of the former Detroit City Council President, Mary Ann Mahaffey. Susan, we're so honored to have you here today to introduce our panel.
Cheryl, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I have strong, special feelings about Wayne State University, where my mother was a professor. She was also a longstanding city council member and city council president, and she was the first woman president of the National Association of Social Workers. In these and in all of her roles, she was a progressive advocate for civil rights and social and economic justice, and she was relentless. She believed that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and she would be so excited to hear the dialogue about disability rights and justice taking place today. I have the privilege of introducing someone that I call my friend and someone who is quickly becoming a friend. First, I want to tell you a little about Judy Heumann. Judy, throughout her life, has traveled the world in her motorized wheelchair, has been playing an important role in the development and implementation of major legislation, including the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, and more recently, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. She has had a powerful influence since being a very, very young woman. And she is currently the co-author of Being Human. She is featured and as a star of Crip Camp, which is a disability revolution, which is available for viewing for free on Netflix, YouTube page. I know that her book is available on Audible and on various internet websites. I hope it's coming to libraries all over the country, including in Detroit. And it's just such a pleasure to see you here with us today.
Nice to see you.
Second person joining us is Lisa Franklin, who is the CEO and founder of Warriors on Wheels of Metropolitan Detroit. And that's a 501c3 nonprofit that advocates for services for people with disabilities and older people. Lisa, interestingly, she was telling me that she grew up a couple of blocks away from the site of the Detroit Rebellion, which I also remember. Lisa, at the time, was very young, but her father made sure that his family was safe. But more than that, he stayed and became an incredible community leader and was responsible for bringing about the rejuvenation and the betterment of the Detroit community. He was a tremendous advocate who worked on the front lines. And so, Lisa, I know that, like me, you come by your advocacy honestly through growing up with someone who is an advocate and public servant. And
absolutely. Thank you so much, Susan.
I love getting to know you. Thanks.
Same here. Same here. Thank you. Well, this is indeed a pleasure and an honor. I've heard about Judy. I've seen the movie Crip Camp. And if you have not seen it by now, you are really doing yourself a disservice. You must see the movie. It talks about Judith's life. And it also talked about her strong advocacy to get the 504 passed and also the ADA passed. I hope that you will stay with us throughout this discussion and learn more about her and her two books, Being Human, and also for young adults, Rolling Warrior. Judith, how are you today?
I'm great, Lisa. Great to be with you.
Thank you.
If I could, I just want to say something about Susan. Sorry, you're off camera, but I had the privilege of getting to know Susan over many years when she was the director of the Center for Independence in New York. And I want to say how lucky Detroit is to have her. Susan was my go-to person. I've been living in Washington now since 1993, and I would, a couple times a year, get calls from someone, usually who had a family member in New York. There was something going on. They weren't getting what they needed. The family member had a disability, and who should they call? And I always knew that if I called Susan, she and her staff would respond to phone calls, not only help people get information, but help make sure that they were getting what they needed. So I didn't know about her mother. And so, you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I think it's really wonderful that I'm sure New York misses you, but it's great that you're in Detroit, being able to really help advance your mother's legacy and continue to do the great work that you have done and will, I know, continue to do. And great that you and Lisa are now getting to know each other more. And Lisa, know that Susan is a great source of thought and influence.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Judy. Susan, we need you in Detroit.
I'm so glad to be here with you. I love coming home.
Okay, great. Well, we will definitely be in touch after this, but let's get into this discussion. Thank you so much. I have met your mom. I was, when she was over the Disability Task Force for the city of Detroit. Yeah, I went to a few of the meetings before she stepped away.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, she was a pleasure, and she was a hard worker, and she definitely believed in the people and the people with disabilities. She had a heart for people with disabilities. So we appreciate you and her.
I think we all come from strong advocacy backgrounds and people who care about people. And that's such a tremendous advantage in life that we have, that we share.
It's important to have the passion. That is for sure. That keeps you going.
It does.
But, okay, well, I want to get into the, first of all, the book here. There is a prelogue in the beginning that says, as a young woman, Julie rode her wheelchair through the doors of the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare in San Francisco as a leader of the Section 504 sit-in, the largest takeover of the government building in U.S. history. Working with a community of over 150 disabled activists and allies, Judy helped to successfully pressure the Carter administration to implement protections for disabled people's rights, sparking a national movement and leading to the creation of the ADA. And so we definitely have a trailblazer with us here today. The Washington Post named you the godmother of the disability movement and that you are a badass. So don't let the looks fool you, everyone. But we have some questions here that we're going to get into. In your book, Being Human, Judy, you discuss your childhood and you relate a fascinating set of circumstances. Your parents were sent over as teens to escape Nazi Germany, and their lessons to their children about questioning authority and constructing arguments to support their beliefs. And how influential do you believe your parents were in developing your definitely relentless and tenacity of your advocacy?
Well, Lisa, I'm sorry. Lisa, I didn't hear about your mother, but your father certainly sounds like a very strong person who very clearly influenced your life. And I want to say that my parents, I don't think they saw themselves when they were first getting married as being influencers. I think they, both were sent over from Germany. My dad had been in the Second World War. My mother was 12 when she came over, had no family that she knew in the States, lived with a distant relative who was much older. And she was creating a life for herself as she was moving forward. My dad was sent to live with relatives in Brooklyn, and all his brothers were able to get out, but parents, grandmother, and many other relatives didn't. But they were resilient. I think their resilience really was getting tested after they had me, and then at 18 months old, I had polio. My mother was pregnant with my brother. She was 9 months pregnant, actually, when I had polio. So what I learned from them, and really in some way I'm continuing to learn from them, even though, they died in the 1990s, was, my father's, there is no such thing as no. And whether he literally believed that, I think very much made me realize that not believing in no doesn't mean you get yes every day. It means that getting to yes in many ways is something which comes incrementally and which is constantly being reshaped. And so I think those are some of the important points that I learned from my father and my mother. My mother, like many mothers, was the on the ground foot soldier, because my dad was working 6 days a week, 12, 14 hours a day. And he was very supportive of my mother. But, you know, as you get older, you can reflect back on things that our parents were doing and others were doing. And I think as we get older, we really get to kind of decipher and figure out what and how they were doing things, and filling in what you don't know with whatever you think might have happened. So for me, I always tell parents that it is really important that they be strong role models for their children, that they fight in the case of disabled kids for their children to be in inclusive settings, for quality education, and allow children to believe that their kids can succeed.
Absolutely.
They're not going to have all the answers, but how to reach out to others to help get answers.
Absolutely. And my mom, she worked, hard worker, and my dad was a civil engineer. But my mom taught us how to be respectful. I was a baby of 7. I have a twin brother. So I was spoiled. I got just about everything. And I was daddy's girl. But, you know, when after he sent us to Ohio to be with my grandmother to come in 67 when the rebellion started, because we were only a block away from 12th Street. And so the tanks were up and down our street and the whole 9 yards. So he sent us to Ohio and stayed to protect our home. Well, after it was all said and done, he became the president of the Linwood Community Organization and also the VP of Virginia Park Citizens District Council. So they were responsible for rebuilding 12th Street, building homes. So I saw this. I saw him going to countless meetings, and I saw the neighborhood come back to life. And so you're right. Our parents, without us even knowing, instill certain things in us that makes us passionate and respectful and able to molding us into the person that we are as adults. And so, yeah, that's very important, very important. And I love them for that. I had no idea that I would be where I am today. I was injured in a car accident in 1996. And so I'm a very spiritual person. So I just asked God, well, would there's something from this? I know there is. You know, you have covered me. I'm still here to talk about it. So whatever you need me to do. And here I am with you today, Judith. And I'm just so glad to be able to meet you, and so that we can connect and I can call you with questions, because I will be calling.
Thank you.
I will be calling for advice. But my second question for you, well, you know what? I have a question for you since we're talking about our background and some of the speeches and motivation that you've done for other people. In some of your speeches that motivated and incited so many individuals to act and remain in the fight, realizing that at any time it could turn for the worse. What were some of your motivational antidotes that you would use? How would you talk to people? How did you get people to understand how important it was, and that you needed them to hang in there with you just one more day? You just told them one more day. And how did you resonate that to them? Because so many people are fearful of getting involved nowadays because of retaliation. They think things may change for them. So what was that like?
So I think, we're looking at a continuum of issues. So when we look at the 504 demonstrations, when we were finally in the building, trying to get people to stay more days, I'll discuss. But one of the important aspects about this, for the audience, there was a law passed and signed in 1973 called the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And in that law, there is something called Title V. This is for history buffs. And in Title V, there's something called Section 504. Section 504 is basically identical to a provision that was in the Civil Rights Act of 64, but the Civil Rights Act of 64 does not cover disabled people. So this particular provision says if an entity is getting money from the federal government, it may not discriminate against someone based on their disability. Now, this was a very important new piece of legislation. And if we unpack it and understand what it said, it meant if a state government, a local government, transit, schools, universities, hospitals, healthcare facilities, all of those entities get money from the federal government. And what did it mean not to be able to discriminate? And who were disabled people? Those were questions that were being answered between 1973 and 1977 as the rules to implement the law were coming about. And I was in New York then in 73. I went to Berkeley. I was in graduate school. I was getting involved with a wonderful organization called the Center for Independent Living, which was the first CIL really around the world and in the United States. And then I also, while in graduate school, went to Washington, D.C. and worked for a senator for a year and a half. All of this was very important because I was working with other disabled people in Berkeley and at the national level, a group called the American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities, which was based in DC. And that organization was composed of other disability rights groups. So what you see happening between 73 and 77 is really the growth of a disability movement that was also working not just with a particular group of disabled people, but people with various physical disabilities, developmental disabilities, sensory disabilities, on and on. And it was those of us coming together, really learning our stories as we were working on these regulations, talking more honestly about what kinds of discrimination we were experiencing, because many people were ashamed of being identified as having a disability or didn't know whether they had a disability or were afraid of saying that they had been discriminated against, were afraid or didn't know how to file a complaint with a government agency, all these things which are the same as any other community that is given protections. It's not just that you get the protections and the next day you know what to do. Mm-hmm. So over this period of time between 73 and 77, when this group called the American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities basically gave an ultimatum to the newly elected President Jimmy Carter, who was a Democrat and had been supported by disabled people around the United States, because he said that he would sign the regulations in the form that they were in when he assumed office.
Okay.
That didn't happen. Sorry.
Yeah.
That did not happen. They were not signed. So there were demonstrations around the country.
Right.
And when these demonstrations occurred and 150 or more people went into the federal building, nobody was prepared to stay overnight. Nobody. And so we were able to get people to recognize that each one of them individually and collectively made a difference. And that we believed if we could hang strong, supporting what was going on around the country on getting these regulations signed, that it would impact people individually and collectively. And that's really why people were staying. They saw a bigger vision, and they were a part of it.
Well, let's go back just a little bit to your early days at Camp Jeanette and talk a little bit about how all of this stemmed from the collection of like minds and spirits. At Camp Jeanette in Upper New York, you were a counselor for a camp where families would send their teenagers to every summer for 2 weeks. And you all became like a family. And back in the early 70s, buses weren't accessible, subways, trains weren't accessible, curbs, just barriers all over the place. And so out of discussions from this camp, you all became friends and started to fight, from what I understand. So now this is where you are rallied together for 504 and ultimately the ADA. So we've got some clips from the film Crip Camp, which was produced by Barack and Michelle Obama Foundation. And if you have not seen the movie, tune in as soon as we leave this webinar, this symposium today. You've got to watch it. But anywhere for 5 hours without resting my body. What was that like, Judith? And, you know, it lasted for 28 days. That's amazing. That is really amazing.
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. It was amazing. And I think none of us could have predicted the amount of time that people had to be there. A group of about 23 or 4 of us left the Bay Area and went to Washington, D.C., and we're working with people in D.C., linking up with other disabled activists from around the country. And then the group went back the day that the regulations were signed to be able to have a celebration when people came out. I think, you know, what was going on in the building is it was building a little community. People who didn't know each other were getting to know each other. And there were people there who knew each other before they came in. And there was work that they were doing. So there were all kinds of committees, communication committee, the food committee, the entertainment committee, the communication committee, which was very important, getting information into the group, getting information out from the group. You can see that the work that we did with the media was very important. And you see that when you watch Crip Camp, a gentleman named Evan White, who was one of the reporters that basically embedded himself with the work that we were doing and came with us to Washington, D.C., which is why there's so much good documentation. But I believe that everyone in the building believed that they individually and collectively made a difference. And we were seeing progress on a day-by-day basis. In some cases, it didn't feel like very much, but it was really important that we kept people informed, that they felt that, we felt that when we weren't in San Francisco, we knew what was going on, and that the people in San Francisco were being kept up to date to what was going on in Washington. And this 3,000-mile bridge was something that in the end was going to be instrumental in getting these regulations not only signed, but the objective was signed unchanged, signed as they were when the Carter administration came into office. And what we were concerned about, and one of the reasons why these demonstrations happened, is we were learning from staff inside Health, Education, and Welfare that the new secretary, head of the agency, was looking not only at a review, which he of course had the right to do, changing administrations, of course they're going to look at what they're signing, but he also had worked for companies and agencies and universities as a lobbyist. And so we were afraid that he was going to be in a position now where he could make changes that we felt would be unacceptable. So there were lots of reasons: creativity, humor, love and support, I think is what really made this happen.
And you know, they probably didn't like that at all. So they turned the water off. They, once people were going out to connect with their families, they locked them out, wouldn't let them back in. I understand at one point they were giving you a glass of water and a donut for food. So, and of course, they knew what they were doing. They were trying to weaken your strength because you were strong in numbers. And so in order for you all to eat, there's a very interesting part in the book and in the movie that the one of your protesters was Lomax.
Brad
Lomax.
Brad Lomax.
And Brad Lomax was a Black Panther?
Yes.
And so let us cue in clip number 2 and look at that for a moment. And then we'll ask you some questions about that.
I think a couple of points. Brad Lomax was not only a member of the Black Panthers, he was one of the founding members of the Panthers in Oakland. And he acquired multiple sclerosis. And so he obviously was a respected member of the party and was a part of the organizing group in the Bay Area. And it was he that reached out to them to get them to support what we were doing. Brad was in the building and then also went with us to Washington, D.C. There were other groups that also supported, but I think really the Black Panthers were particularly of note given the work that they were doing in Oakland at that time. And I believe one of the reasons why people were able to stay is people weren't hungry. So we were able to be in an environment that was completely not comfortable. We had gotten mattresses sent down by the state government, who sent mattresses for people to sleep on. And the mayor of San Francisco, Moscone, who later was killed, the same time that member Harvey Milk was killed, the first gay man elected to a city council around the country, that he was very supportive of the activities. And although it was a federal building, he basically was not supporting dragging us out of the building. So I think part of the message here is that disabled people in our communities at that time in the Bay Area had also been very active with our local governments. So they knew who many of the people were, and they stayed supportive of what we were trying to do because they knew that what we were trying to do was right. They knew about discrimination that we were facing. And remember, we're talking about entities that got money from the federal government. And so one of the ways to help end discrimination would be to ensure that discrimination across many areas would no longer be legal. So Moscone was one of the people that was a strong supporter.
And that's what we need. And let's say that again, Judy. Let's say that again for the politicians who we've talked to till we're blue in the face, and they know that we need support from politicians in low and higher places to help us squash discrimination of people with disabilities. Absolutely. Can you describe the importance of building collaborations with other partners to strengthen movements?
Yeah, I mean, I think the disability community in many ways was learning from the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s and forward. Television, I always talk about the importance of television because it allowed us in little ways to be able to learn about big issues. We could read the newspapers, look at pictures, but when we were able to also have television that could really show us, what was going on in the South when Rosa Parks was not allowed to sit in the front of the bus, what was going on when Black people were trying to integrate schools and were trying to integrate, five and dime stores. It was very powerful for us to see people who were putting their lives on the line, because their lives were on the line in many ways every day. But being able to see it, I think, really inspired many of us, taught many of us that we had to really believe what we were fighting for. And we had to do it in a way that, in some cases, was risking people's health and lives, which is what Jimmy Lebrecht was saying, the moderator of the film. But it was for a bigger reason.
Absolutely. Yes. So when you went to Washington and talked to, was that where Califano is? In Washington?
I never met him.
Oh, he never came into the room.
Until this day, he never, after he signed the regulation, he never convened a group of disabled leaders to come in and talk.
He ran out of the room that day. We
were in California and he was in Washington, but he came into that group, he stood on a table, then he left. And when Evan White was there, when we had come from from California to DC, you know, Evan asked the secretary, why won't he meet with us? And he said he wouldn't meet with us because we had an illegal demonstration. But that being said, he never, when he signed the regulations, never had the decency to invite people in to basically say, now we've signed it, we're here, we're going to work with you on implementation. And he would not have done that, I firmly believe, for any other group.
Right.
Because the civil rights community was fighting with government all the time, right? And it took a while, but Dr. King and others finally did get into the Kennedys, did get in with the Johnsons to really make them do more things. And it wasn't easy, but in the area of disability, I think it spoke to, and not as much, but still speaks to today, how it's not just politicians, but we can talk about them now, that they don't see the power of our community. And partly it's because we need to show the power of our community more.
Absolutely.
And I think that's
the
work that's going on now in many states with suppression of voting rights.
Yes.
Every disabled person needs to be registered, working, and making it clear to politicians that they will not support them in their reelection or in their initial election if in fact they do not deeply understand who we are and what they need. And I think we're doing it a little bit better, but quite frankly, we're not doing it strong enough.
No, and you know, Judy, in the last census count for the city of Detroit, there were 126,000 individuals registered as people with disabilities. So that's powerful.
Yeah.
We can turn an election. And, you know, right here, I just want to interject and suggest that early voting has already started. If you haven't voted yet, please do make a plan to. And you can even register on the same day. We also found out that there were a lot of people with disabilities that weren't even registered to vote. Mm-hmm. So we must exercise that right. Judy, you have served in so many important leadership positions, including as special advisor on international disability rights for the U.S. State Department under President Obama, deputy director for the Center for Independent Living in California, we talked about that, and legislative assistant to the chair of the U.S. Senate Committee on Labor and Public Welfare in 1974. So right now we're going to
work in the Clinton administration.
And also the Clinton administration. I know that Hillary Clinton, you and her did a lot of work together. And I really want to talk to you more about the treaty and what's happening internationally. It's a fascinating woman, everyone. Riveting. I mean, I've seen it 5 or 6 times and it still makes me cry. That was just, you know, and believe it or not, some of that still goes on today. So, Judy, I know this is a broad question, but can you talk about the role of and the need for understanding and using the law and policy to create equity and justice for people with disabilities, as you did in the case of the 504 and many other pieces of legislation?
You know, first of all, Lisa, I always have to say that it's not me, it's many people. And I feel that so strongly because there's so many people in every community that make things happen. People play different roles, but one person never makes these changes. And tell me again what the question was.
Yeah, but how, no, it's okay. The role of the need for understanding and using the law and policy to create change for people with disabilities, yes.
I think we need to recognize that we need to continually be helping people learn about their rights.
I'm sorry to interrupt everyone, but
yeah, the feed went off.
Yes, because Netflix, YouTube has blocked us because we played the Netflix video.
Oh my God!
So that's that they blocked us because it was copyright, whatever. But we can start to. I'm going to let them know we're going to start a different stream. So I'm going to give you a different link, and we're going to start it again. We're going to start. Where are you going?
Turn it around. Let's see. My friend said it's back. Wait, I don't see it.
Oh, okay. Actually,
you okay, Judy?
I'm fine.
Yeah. Okay.
You may have to ask me the question again.
Okay, I think they let us back in. I see it on this computer. Look, Marguerite. Okay, so let me ask you the question again. Okay.
Sorry.
Forgive me, everyone. I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, just talk about the role and need for understanding the law and how right and how we can change things in equity for people with disabilities if you know your rights.
And I wouldn't just discuss this around disability. You know, any law, civil rights laws in particular, people will know about them as we're moving towards them and working hard to get these laws passed. And then for a period of time, as the laws are beginning to be implemented. But as the number of people who know about the law, not who are affected, but who know about the law, may diminish because they're newly disabled people who never heard of any laws in disability. We need to, on a regular basis, make sure that in the area of disability or other rights movements, people not only understand that there is, for example, a Civil Rights Act, an Americans with Disabilities Act, and a Section 504, and many others, but they need to substantively know, what do these laws mean? What do they do? What is discrimination? If you feel you've been discriminated against, what are the things that you can be doing in order to address it? So regular education is very important. Now, we have in the US what's called the ADA Regional Technical Assistance Centers. I think they're very important. But again, you need to know about them. They do some outreach. But what I would really like is if we had technical assistance similar to what went on after 504 regulations were signed and after the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law. There were trainings that went on for 5 years all across the country to allow people, a certain number of people in each region, to learn about not only what the laws were, but what they weren't, how to file a complaint, how to negotiate, how to work with people at the local level to bring about change. I think that's very, very important. Lawyers and advocates need to learn about what the ADA is and what 504 is and other laws. So that's imperative. I also feel that it's very important that as we are moving forward, that all of the groups of people who've been discriminated based on race, religion, disability, gender, etc., we need to be working more closely together.
Absolutely.
Because disabled people come from all these communities. And you may be a part of one community not having had a disability and then acquire a disability.
Yeah.
And then it's important for people to do what the School of Social Work is talking about, not looking at disability, which is something that is negative, not looking at fixing people, but rather looking at what we need to do to ensure that people can live an active quality life. So
Absolutely.
people need to understand their rights, understand how to use their rights, but it's also that those who have a responsibility not to be discriminating,
Yes.
they also need to understand, what are they doing that may be discrimination? What do they need to change so that they knowingly or unknowingly need to stop discriminating? And I think the community overall, not just disabled people, but disabled people and people of all races and backgrounds, really need to recognize that unity across the board will help advance everyone.
Absolutely. Well, I'm putting it out here right now, Judy. I think you should do a master class on this. I really do. I think that we need a place to go to and learn in all corners of the world what you've done with your life that we can fashion by, definitely.
I mean, Lisa,
Yeah,
you are a leader in your community.
bless your heart.
You are. It's not because of me, it's because of you.
Oh,
And I think it's very important. I keep repeating this. We need to recognize that what we're doing is not brain surgery. What many of us are doing is just looking at commitment and not seeing anything but commitment and drive as something that we believe in.
amen.
We can take a
Amen.
break, but I don't think we can because it's in our blood.
It really is. Yes, it is. So, Judy, where do you think we go from here?
There's so many areas. I think one priority for me really is voting rights and voting suppression. I think whether we live in a state, like I live in DC, A, which is not a state, but B, there are no voting restrictions. In the area of disability, things may not be always being done according to law, and that's an area we have to work on. But in DC, like in Michigan, the forces have not restricted the way people can vote. But when we go to states like Georgia and Texas and the other 20 some states that are putting restrictions on how people can vote, that needs to be of grave concern to us all. So it's not only registering disabled people to vote, it's also making sure that we understand what these restrictions are going to
Yeah,
mean and that we hold our elected representatives accountable.
absolutely.
And I think it's something that's easier said than done in many ways, but there are so many 61 million disabled people in the US. And obviously, we're not all the same political persuasions. But I do hope and believe that the vast majority of people believe that we should have a right to vote
Yes.
and that our disability, our race, our socioeconomic level should not adversely impact our ability to vote.
Amen.
And but that is something that we need to be speaking about much more loudly. Groups like the American Association of People with Disabilities and the work that they're doing with the project called Rev Up, it's a nonpartisan organization, but working to help disabled people understand what their rights are around voting, to be able to help that they're getting information on what are the critical issues. So voting for me is one. The other one is really helping to support the development of a cross-disability movement so that people with all forms of disabilities, visual, visible, and invisible, in fact, recognize that we are stronger together than apart. That the remedies that we may need to address discrimination may be different, but if I support a remedy that you need and you support a remedy that I need, that in the end helps to ensure that appropriate remedies are brought about. And what do I mean by that? So if somebody is deaf, the ability to have sign language and captioning provided all the time.
Yes.
To be able to go to school and get what you need, be able to go to the doctor or the hospital, for those whose first language is not English, for those whose disability adversely affects their ability to read independently, or who may need support in helping to answer questions and process information. And we need, as I've been saying, we need all the civil rights community itself to recognize that we have biases. We all have biases towards one or more people or categories of people. We need to address that. When we see disabled individuals or hear of people with invisible disabilities who are being discussed with organizations that are not just disability groups, when we really can have a more forceful collaboration, I think we will really be advancing the needle a lot more. Because, you know, when we look at COVID and we look at the number of people who died, who had quote unquote underlying conditions,
Yes.
people with diabetes, hypertension, many of those people did not know that they had a disability. And why would that be important? It may well be important because they may be being denied services because of their disability, or they can't drive and they can't get somewhere, and they need assistance in getting from one place to another, or whatever the issue may be. But we have to stop talking about things like underlying conditions.
Yeah.
Diabetes is not an underlying condition. It is a disability.
Okay.
Hypertension is a disability. Depression is a disability. You know, on and on. So we as disabled people need to keep encouraging others that they need to proudly identify as being a Black disabled woman.
Yes.
Blah, 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 whatever. But that should be something that we want people to understand. When we cannot come forward as the total person we are, that also limits our abilities to move forward.
Yes.
We need to be able to bring our whole self forward. You know, I want somebody to understand that I'm using a wheelchair. I don't want someone to say to me, you know, I never even think about you being in a wheelchair. Because if they don't even think about me being in a wheelchair, they may invite me to something that's not accessible.
Absolutely, yeah.
They may be setting something up and not thinking about how are we going to make this accessible so Judy and other Judys can come to these events. I want them to see that I am a woman. I want them to see that I have a disability. I want them to see that I'm Jewish. These are all important things to me.
Yes.
And just like for you, Lisa,
Yes.
you know, the composite of who you are,
That's right.
make us who we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nothing negative at all. Definitely positive. 100%. So we have a lot of questions from people in the audience, because we could talk all day, Judy, and we'll get the opportunity. But I'd like to bring in Catherine Wright. And hold on. Catherine Wright is pursuing a doctoral degree in Wayne State University School of Social Work and Anthropology, which also is known as SWAN.
And a little water in it.
And recently created the Ableism in Social Work, Making Your Practice More Accessible Online. It's a workshop. She focuses on intellectual and developmental disability with an emphasis on how individuals with disabilities navigate the educational system. Thank you for joining us, Catherine.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah. So we have some questions that were previously submitted, and there are quite a few of them, so I won't do them all, but I'm just going to pick and choose a few of them in sake of time.
Did you want me to start out, Lisa?
You can, since you're getting them from the audience that we have here today. Yes.
Yeah, there's it's sort of a group of questions that I think are interesting to talk about together, and it's kind of about allyship. So one student says, I am a social work student passionate about mental health services and access for individuals with disabilities. What can social workers do to make their services easier for clients with disabilities? Another person says, I'm a speech therapist in Detroit. I'm wondering if you can reflect on some things therapists do that are helpful or harmful. And the third in that area, sort of, what's one piece of advice you would give to allies in supporting disability justice?
And Lisa, I'm going to answer. You're going to answer also?
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Judy. You first, please.
First of all, thank you for the question. And I think it's very important for you to, not just the person who's answering this question, but you broadly, including me. We need to understand what strengths and weaknesses exist, for example, in the mental health community. Are we listening to people who have mental health disabilities and what they're saying and what their movement is working towards? I think it's very important that whatever community we're working with, that people who are from those communities need to be the leaders in our discussions. And we need to understand that not everybody will always agree, but you need to understand the perspectives of disabled people with mental health disabilities, with developmental disabilities, whatever the disability may be. And then I think in being an ally, it means that you need to help people advance positions that may not be the most acceptable. People from the psychiatric disability community who themselves have mental health disabilities and have experienced many atrocities and many harmful things need to be listened to. We need to be looking at alternative ways of working with people, the traditional ways that many people with a particular disability don't agree with. And that's how you become an ally. You have discussions, you listen, you learn. I'm not saying you accept everything that people say if you don't agree with it, but I think we really need to, in a much deeper way, be respectful for the people that we're theoretically helping. Or are we in fact reinforcing practices that at the end of the day are harmful to people? Speech therapy is the same. And let me just say, my undergraduate degree was in speech and theater with a concentration on speech therapy. And while I've never practiced, because I moved into teaching and advocacy and policy, one thing that I've been very upset about is that ASHA has come out with a policy opposing what's called facilitated communication. Facilitated communication is something that some disabled people use to help them participate in discussions in their homes, in their places of work, in the community in general. And there has been controversy about facilitated communication for many years now. But I know people who are using facilitated communication, and like anything, things are not always done the right way. But for ASHA to come out completely opposing this, I think in the end is detrimental to ASHA, because people who are using it believe in it. It's helping them advance their lives as equals in society. So if you are a member of ASHA, look at their facilitated communication policy, question it, look in your community at what's going on, who are the people that are using it. There are many different modes of AC, but recognize that we need to be respectful of the people who are being affected by something. And non-disabled people who have typical speech coming out against something like this is exactly what we mean by ableism. So if you really want to look at what ableism is at its deepest core, look at practices that go on that adversely affect people's way of living their lives and being disrespectful because something isn't always done the right way. Allies in general, I mean, I think as an ally, it means you want to be a learner and you want to be able to learn from other people and those people who are affected. So if we're looking at people, I don't know, pick a disability, you also want to look at people who have whatever the disability is and look at the multiplicity aspects of who they are. If they're Black, if they're Latino, if they're an immigrant, because there's so many different issues that come into impacting a person. And in order to be an ally and really help people move forward, we need, especially, you know, you're all, or many of you are studying or are social workers. Social workers play very critical roles. And if you don't understand some of the multiple issues that may be going on with the family, the services they get could be quite dangerous. And so we need, as social workers, as advocates in whatever area, we really need to take the time to learn. And we really need to question what we are learning in school. You know, what are we reading? What are we studying? But who are the people that we're meeting who come from these different communities? What do they think about the work that we're doing? What changes would they like us to be making in the work that we do on a regular basis on a volunteer or paid level? So that's what I think really we're looking, you know, universities to me are very critical. I believe in them a lot. I believe that disability studies is something which needs to be occurring on all college campuses. But I also believe that other studies need to be integrating disability into what they're doing, and that disability studies needs itself to be able to be representative, not just of disability, but of disability plus all these other aspects that impact our lives, that impact our thinking, our acting, the support that we get. You know, we need to feel proud of who we are.
Yeah.
And we are more than one thing. And social workers, I think, are really in a unique position to really advance that. And to be able to say when you know something and when you don't know something, and to be able to look at other people who can help you do a better job.
Yes. And, you know, I agree with that 100%. In a lot of ways, as an advocate, we are social workers. You know, when you have an organization of people with disabilities, you know, that's exactly what you are. When you support one another, when you listen to one another, when you have a shoulder to cry on. So mental health is very important. And I think that the resources need to be there. I think that recreationally, because there's different levels of mental health, of course, you know. So I think that just being able to socialize, get to know one another, find out where a person is just something that we've been doing for a long time in our group. And it's important. And go ahead, Catherine. You can go with the next question.
Sure. We had another.
What Judy was
Oh, but wait a second, Catherine. Maybe, Lisa, you could talk a little bit more about what you do in your groups.
Well, we have been advocating for the rights with local government, making sure that we have the same advantages as anyone else, accessible housing, clean, safe, reliable transportation, the ability to vote in accessible voting sites, making sure that the accessible machines are up and running on the day that anybody else gets to vote, whether it's early or on election day. We should have that right. There was a lawsuit from the National Federation of the Blind that came out of the National Federation of the Blind because the ballots are not in Braille. And so what they did is they put the applications in Braille, but then after you put the application in for the absentee ballot, you couldn't vote unless someone was hanging over your shoulder. So we still have a long ways to go, but it is very important. So we've been doing that quite some time. And it's just been very, very rewarding. So, yeah.
We had another question come in from the chat. This person says, I'm a PhD student in educational studies, and I work in a community program based at Eastern Michigan. The question is, what would disability justice look like in K through 12 public schools in the United States? What would be the first concrete actions to start organizing through a disability justice perspective in schools?
I would say there are different aspects of first. So one first for me is that parents understand what their rights are under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, under 504 and under ADA. And why do I say that? Because parents are the first line with their kids. It's the parents who bring their kids to school. It's the parents who are hopefully overseeing what's going on educationally. It's the parents who are seeing things that are working and are not working. And it's the parents that are frequently asking for help and are not getting the support that they needed. Their children are not being appropriately evaluated, not being appropriately served, all too frequently being taken out and put in separate classes and not being included. So having parents that are knowledgeable and armed and not alone. By that I mean it can be very difficult, not in the area of disability only, but in any other area, when you feel like you are the only one there trying to make a difference. When you're dealing with teachers and social workers and speech therapists and all these different groups of people that come together for an IEP meeting, and you come in by yourself. So parents who are having issues trying to get their children what they need should be able to talk with people in advance about what to be prepared for, what to have when they come to a meeting, and ideally to have somebody who can come with them to the meeting, whether or not they support them in actually speaking or just be a moral support. I think that to me is logical. If you have to get to a place where you're arguing with the school district on needing various support services and wanting, for example, that your kid is in an inclusive setting, many times you really need support. So I think the parents are critical, and helping them learn is very important. Likewise, I think we need to be ensuring that teachers and administrators.
I was just about to go there, Judy. Go ahead. Go ahead, please.
They need to be learning in school about what inclusive ed is, about how to make accommodations in a classroom, not just for kids who are identified as having disabilities, but as we know, the classrooms of today are very different than the classrooms of 45 years ago. They're much more diverse in many, many ways. So teachers need to be getting better training, and teachers who are quote unquote special education teachers really need to be looking and learning about how to help appropriately assist students with various disabilities learn how to read and write and do math and science and whatever, and be supportive with the regular classroom teacher. So teacher education and teacher training is something which is important, not just in the area of special ed, but general ed teachers need also to be learning much more about the diversity in a classroom, and how a child who may have a learning disability or dyslexia or whatever it may be, their first thought should be, how can I get this kid out of my class?
Right.
It should really be looking at what kinds of supports does this student need and how can we get the support that the student needs. I think in education, we need to be fighting much more in general for more tax dollars being spent on public education. I'm very concerned about money that's going into other than public education, because we see in many of these alternative settings that disabled children are not being brought in, that they're not being successful. Maybe they're setting up segregated schools only for disabled kids, which is exactly what many of us do not want. So, you know, it's really, all of this doesn't have an answer. I would say it's looking in your communities, at districts, at schools, at leadership who are doing good work and emulating them. When I worked in the Clinton administration, I was an assistant secretary in education, and one of the areas I had responsibility over with the director of the Office of Special Ed Programs was special education. So when I traveled, I visited schools all the time. And I could tell as soon as I got into the school what the school thought about disabled kids, what the school looked like, where the kids were, how they were being spoken about. There were some schools you went in and you knew right away that you had leadership there that was not only supporting education of disabled kids, but really took their responsibility on very seriously for education of all kids. And those were the schools that I really feel needed to be raised up, that their principals and vice principals and teachers who are doing really good work really needed to be involved with other schools to look at what was happening that was good and what was happening that needed to change. So, you know, look at the parent training information centers, the protection and advocacy in Michigan, other organizations that are doing strong advocacy. Learn about what's going well, learn about what's not going well, and learn and work on what you can do to have an influence.
Thank you for that. You're giving me an idea. So thank you for that, because you are right that the parents need to know their rights. But I think you're doubly right to say that administrators and teachers and school board members, education committees, what down the line, no.
Run for school board.
Yes.
Become educated, get support, run for school board.
Yeah.
Not just for disabled kids, but for all kids.
Yes, to know. Absolutely.
We need to have many more people in elected positions.
Okay.
Great. I have another question, sort of changing topics, and this one is very close to home, very close to Wayne State. So the question is, how do we get local building code officials to have more pride in what ADA provides to people, rather than treat it as an inconvenience or a choice to property owners? And I'll just add that elevator access at Wayne State University can be a little terrifying sometimes, and I see signs about how many times have you got caught in an elevator. And so some social workers are interested in advocating for better elevator access in our own university here.
There, I think, you ask for a meeting with the highest up at the school, and you bring people together and you ask them to produce their plans. Why is this happening? How often is it happening? How long is it taking you to fix them? Why is it taking so long, and why are they breaking? I think it's really the leadership of the school is the one that has responsibility for maintaining the structure of the school. Do they have a committee that's dealing with grounds? Of course they have committees that are dealing with grounds and buildings and new construction, etc. I don't know if there are disabled people who are knowledgeable working on those committees, if they're on staff. But I would definitely say you go to the core of the problem. Does the leadership know what the problem is? what are they directing people to do? What is their timeline to do it? And what are people, faculty, staff, and students doing when this is not happening correctly? It needs to go beyond just complaining that it's been an inconvenience. If it's a repeated inconvenience that people feel is not being dealt with, then people need to make it be dealt with. It's not an issue as to whether or not you want to do your job. You're paid for doing your job.
Yes. I have a question here about disabilities and dating.
I don't have to do
That was
that.
interesting.
I'm very happy about that. I'm married.
Oh,
Yeah.
very good.
I'll look backwards.
Think back in your day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people have a misconception that people with disabilities can be in relationships. And I know quite a few people that are very happy in relationship. There was a couple in the movie Crip Camp.
Neil and Denise.
Yes, that had a relationship and were very happy for many years. So I say test the water, know yourself, and there's definitely someone for everyone. Go around to different gatherings where people with disabilities are, you don't have to stay in with someone with a disability. I've been married or together with the same guy for 35 years, and yeah, we were together before my accident, but we're still together, after our accident. And he better not turn his head too long,
So I'm married.
I hope he's not anywhere looking at it right now.
I'm married 29 years, and my husband does have a disability. And I've told him if I find him ever messing around, he goes home in a Jewish coffin back to Mexico. And
right.
You can say that because you trust them.
That's
but
right.
On a serious note, I think, dating can be an issue because if people look at us as not being equal, they may not be thinking about us as someone they want to ask out. So I think it's really as we change the way people view disabled people and where people can really look at, well, what is the kind of person I'm interested in going out with? What are the values that I want them to hold? And not rule people out because they may have one or more types of disabilities that, they have a bias against. But I think it's a little better than it was before. But I still think that we haven't made the pivotal changes that we need to make so that when looking at dating as an example, I think all too frequently we're not looking at each other the same way we would be looking at each other if we knew that someone didn't have a disability. I just think we hear too many of those stories still. And again, at the end of the day, it's who do you know in your community? How are you talking to people? When these discussions come up, what are people saying? And that's the way we learn. And I think that's, again, learning is something that I think is so important when we're addressing issues of discrimination, regardless of what the cause of it is or who it's infecting.
Yeah. Lisa, we had a question come in that I think would be interesting for both. And Judy, I don't know how much you know about Michigan's auto insurance reform that recently occurred. Since now there's no more no-fault reform in the state, many people who rely on funding through their insurance because of disability that they received through an auto accident are losing that funding. Yeah. So the question is, we're trying our best, but leadership is still ignoring us. So what more can we do?
Well, I can tell you that there are several groups around the state that are rallying around that. And there's a Facebook page entitled We Can't Wait, Michigan, MI. And I myself was in an automobile accident, so I was covered under auto no fault. Now there's $26 billion in that MCAA fund to continue to providing care. But when the governor and the mayor of the city of Detroit signed this bill, well, he supported the bill. The domino effect from it is just horrendous. I don't care what economic status you are from, how much money you have, what you've done in the past. People are losing services and ending up in the institutions, in the group homes, in the nursing homes, in assisted living. And ultimately, the government is still going to have to pay. And so people have lost their attendant care. They have lost the ability to go physical therapy, to occupational therapy. And I myself am in that category where my family used to help take care of me, for some of the daily things. The insurance company will no longer support me in having my family do the work. And so if your family is able to stay home and help take care of a loved one, and the insurance company pulls that away, then the family members have to go out and work. They have to sustain the house, or the person who had this house modified for them will no longer be able to stay there because nobody's there to support it. And so when you take that income away from a family, it's devastating. And so it puts so many people in harm's way that it's unreal. And I just can't believe that the legislators don't understand and don't want to understand what's happening in the state of Michigan with people covered under auto no fault. In just in Detroit alone, the 126,000 that I mentioned earlier, half of them are auto no fault. That's an awful lot of people. And so if you go on that website, We Can't Wait, you can find out more information about a lot of the stories. I mean, we're talking about 5-year-olds and babies who were injured in auto accidents that no longer have the nursing care to help aspirate them or care for them in the middle of the night while their family members are. This is really horrendous. It really is. And I can't, the way politicians are, I can't believe they're doing it for money, but I can't believe that they don't have a heart enough to understand that these survivors are now people that are cannot do certain things for themselves and need the support, and they're taking it away from them. It's just a sad affair. It really is.
What's the name of the?
We Can't Wait, MI. Mm-hmm. It's We Can't Wait, MI. We Can't Wait, Michigan. They've got a website, but that's a Facebook page. I'm sorry, that's a Facebook page, Judy. We Can't Wait. Yes.
It's Facebook?
Yes, it's Facebook. Loads of information. Thank you.
Thank
you for asking that question, Catherine. Yes. And we're willing to fight. We're working on a town hall meeting, a roundtable discussion. We're working to go up to Lansing on November the 9th to lobby some of the politicians. The We Can't Wait group goes every Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Yes.
Is this something that's already happened?
Oh, yes. As of July 1st, 2021, they start yanking away services because they changed the fee schedule. So when they changed the fee schedule, they're only paying 45% of what they used to pay. So businesses are closing down. It's awful. It's awful, Judy. It's unbelievable. Businesses are shutting down. People are losing their support, and they're pushing people into institutions. It's awful. It's awful. So we're fighting back.
How's the media covering it?
Not very much, very little. Could be a lot more. And so we're working on getting that done too. We're working with a company right now who's providing us with videography so that hopefully we can shoot it out to the media. And we've got some attorneys that's supporting it so that we can get some advertising done. So hopefully you'll hear more about it, and I have some questions for you. But Catherine, I know you probably got a ton of other questions. So thank you. So.
Yes, I know that's a really important issue right now in Michigan. So this is a question that came in earlier. From your perspective, Judy, how does disability justice look compared in the United States compared to other countries? So can you give us sort of a global comparison?
I mean, globally, the United States is, I almost don't like to give comparisons. I think in many ways there are many similar things going on in the US to what's going on in other countries. Now, certainly countries that have, well, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, which is a UN treaty that began to be worked on in about 2002 and came into force in 2006 or 2008, basically is similar to, not identical to, but similar to the ADA. There are more than 180 countries that have done what's called ratified the treaty, which means that the government has agreed that it will work on implementing the treaty, which deals with education, housing, healthcare, independent living, the right to technology, etc. And as a result of the treaty and all these countries that are ratifying it, not including the United States, my neighbor, you want to meet my neighbor? My neighbor.
Hello, neighbor.
This is our podcast, our pod neighbor.
Oh, okay.
So I would say that the voices of disabled people all over the country, all over the world, are becoming stronger. I would say that many of our laws are stronger than laws in other countries. And I would say that many of our laws have been enforced for more years, and that we have stronger mechanisms to deal with implementation than in many countries. And so we also, it's very valuable that we work with other countries, both with the disability community and governments. When I worked at the State Department, one of my responsibilities was working within the State Department and across the federal government on trying to get the United States to ratify this Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. Now, just a little bit of history. In the US, which is every country is different, in order to get a treaty ratified, which means the president, in this case, would sign and agreeing that we will enforce, we have to get 2/3 of the US Senate to agree that they recommend ratification. Well, the Republicans have been in control of the Senate, and even though they're not in control right now, the margin is very small, and they have opposed ratification forever. They don't like the United Nations. That is one area where it's very different than most other countries. Most other countries really value the United Nations. I would say one of the big differences between us and many other countries is that we really do not, in a strong enough way, recognize our obligations, in my view, to support what's going on in other countries and to address issues of poverty and to be able to help elevate quality of life for disabled people and others. In many other countries where their governments do international work, the disability community is much more engaged. In Finland, in Norway, in Sweden, in Denmark, in England, in Japan, in Australia, in Canada, you can see really much more engagement that's happened over a long period of time. So one important part about the work that went on when we were, when I was working in the Obama administration in the Department of State with Secretary Clinton and then Secretary Kerry, was we were really reaching out, working with the disability community helping them to understand why this was important. A group called the United States International Council on Disability, USICD. So any of you that are interested in international work, you can go on their website, USICD. And they've been working very actively on both treaty ratification and many other issues like Afghanistan and disabled people in Afghanistan trying to get out of Afghanistan, etc. So there are efforts that have been going on to work with countries around the world to help advance the rights of disabled people in other countries. The State Department and USAID in the United States have really been, over the years, doing more and more work in this area, but we're not where we need to be yet at all. And I guess one other thing that's interesting, so you look at our laws like on education, ADA 504, they're definitely stronger than I think any other laws around the world. But when you look at things like universal health care, you know, what do we talk about universal health care? Socialist, communist, terrible, bad, bad, bad. People in other countries have no idea what we are talking about. They look at us and they, like my friend's father, and she's a US citizen. She worked with me at the State Department, now at USAID. Her father was a British citizen. He was in the hospital in and out for a couple of years. They never had a bill.
Right.
They had nurses and doctors come visit at home. He was in and out of the hospital. They never got a bill. It's not that there wasn't charges, but it came through their taxes. My cousin went to Canada to go to school at the university. You know, you get a card. You know, once you've been accepted, you can get your health care. We don't understand it, or we believe lies that are being told that, oh no, there are all these terrible waiting lists in these other countries. We have waiting lists all the time here.
Mm-hmm.
And we have lists that don't even allow you in if you don't have the money to pay.
That's right.
You know, and so for me, that's what's always been interesting about learning about what's going on in other countries. How we have some things that they don't have, and some things that we desperately need and desperately want, but have a citizenry that is just, we have not informed people enough about what life is like in other countries that do have nationalized health care, as an example.
Cuba.
Yeah,
You know,
Cuba's got a lot of problems, but Cuba definitely, days in the past, definitely was providing health care to all of the people, all of its residents. Definitely. And you saw years ago how they were sending people out to help in other countries, train doctors, etc. Yeah. But Canada, England,
right across.
Really. Yeah.
Right across the way.
It's painful.
Yeah, it really is. Catherine?
Yeah. So this is sort of a question for advice. When reflecting on your own journey in advocacy, what advice do you have for self-advocates and their family members who advocate with them?
So I'm not a big supporter of the term self-advocacy.
Oh, that would be great to explain, I think.
I will. And I think there are more people with developmental disabilities who are also not liking the term self-advocacy. I don't know why you call someone who has a developmental disability a self-advocate, and you don't call Lisa and myself self-advocates. You don't need to use the word self. When we talk about advocacy, people with all types of disabilities, we need to be seen as advocates, and families seen as supporting what we are wishing to accomplish in our life.
That's right. If we change it for us, it changes for everybody.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, when you use the word self-advocate, what does it tell you? It tells you that the person has a developmental disability. It tells you that, well, maybe they really can't be their own advocate. And maybe they need somebody else to do their advocacy. And maybe we're inviting them in, we're not exactly sure why. But for me, I understood when the word came up in the 70s, I think it was really more for non-disabled people to be able to say, you know, where are the people that we're representing? Let's call them self-advocates. And then we can, now, was there a need and is there an ongoing need to support organizations that are run by people with developmental disabilities? So they have their own groups that they can be supporting and running and working with other people? Yes, and that has been happening more than 20 years ago. But I personally want to call people advocates. I don't want to call them self-advocates. And I think that is not at all disrespectful. If anything, I think it's more respectful because I want people to be seen as equal regardless of the cause of their disability. And I think it's important for us within the disability community also to be able to support people who have different ways of, may have different ways of communicating, different ways of decision making. But at the end of the day, nobody does everything the same anyway. And for me, it's always important to have other people around me who know more than I do. One thing in Crip Camp, and anything that you see about me, read the book, whatever, you can tell that I'm always relying on other people. And that's because I know that I don't know everything. And I also know that for me, sometimes I need to role play. I need to really question other people to kind of think about, you know, how should I be looking at this issue? So in the role of families, you need to be knowledgeable as much as possible, be supportive, and really assist your child in meeting other people like themselves who are advocates and who can work together on helping to bring about change, and then working within the broader disability community. I hope that answered your question. And there isn't one answer to your question.
Yeah, of course. So I guess we have questions. I think people are inspired by your story and wondering, you know, how you got it done. So questions like, what event or events motivated you to advocate for disability rights? What is one of the most important lessons you've learned through your life so far? I guess I'll leave it at those two. There may be follow-ups.
I became an advocate because I wasn't happy with what was happening in my life. I became an advocate because my parents were advocates, because they learned to become advocates because they were not happy with what they thought might happen to my life. And I became an advocate because as I met other disabled people, I realized that we all weren't happy with what was happening, and that we needed to come together and create a vision and a pathway. And we needed to really learn how to work together, trust each other, and collaborate.
That's right.
And advocacy for me has always been more than me. You know, it's been us.
That's right.
So, right, Lisa? I mean,
yeah, I agree with that 100%. You know, people say all the time there's powers in numbers, but that is the truth. You know, no man is an island. My aunt used to tell me that all the time. And
right.
you can't know everything. You can't do anything. But of course, there has to be somebody to take the charge. But you can't do it alone. So I agree.
And the last question was what, Catherine?
What is one of the most important lessons you've learned throughout your life so far, either about yourself or about the world?
The world is changing. I need to change with it. We need to continue to expand our circle. We need to be intergenerational because, for example, you know, technology, which is something that kids grow up with today, is not what my generation grew up with. So I'm always needing to be learning. You know, what is Twitter? What is Facebook? What is Instagram? Oh no, this isn't in anymore. That's in now. I never heard of it. So it's like really learning, and language and everything is always changing. So I think it's really being able to be appropriately flexible and try to bring as many people as possible along as change agents.
Yeah.
And I also, sorry, just one other point, and that is that I really feel very strongly that people need to tell their stories.
Mhm.
They need to know their stories. And that's why, the book came about because people kept asking me, would I write a book? And I never felt I could write one on my own. And then people approached me and said they would help me. So they helped me find an agent and Kristen Joyner to work with me on writing the book. And for me, it's telling your story in a way that other people can relate to, can learn from. And it wasn't written with an eye of only a book that disabled people would want to read, but a book that other people could learn from, but that disabled people in particular would resonate to.
And I think the most important lesson for me was that people are people, heart and soul. Never looked at the outer exterior of anyone. And then you learn to communicate. You learn to stop and listen, and to understand and to communicate. And that has been the most important lesson to me. Is you don't look at an outer as a person exterior. You look into their interior.
Excuse me for digressing. We were ordering dinner.
Oh, please share. Thank you. Did you have more questions, Catherine? Because I know we don't have much time. We got about 10 minutes, which is a lot more than. So I've got one here that looks good. Empowering others is so important, of course.
I don't believe you empower others.
Okay.
I believe that you can. Nobody empowered you.
Okay.
You were already empowered and you were seeking knowledge, right? What more could you do? What did you need to learn? I believe that we can support people, we can encourage people, we can allow people to see that we all have power within ourselves.
All right.
And I think that's very important. It's really helping people find within themselves what they have and helping to support it, to grow it.
Amen.
And, and people will present it in different ways, which is why I think working together is so important, because we each are stronger and weaker in certain areas. And when we're trying to make bigger change, we need people who fulfill different roles.
Yes, yes. I had a few questions here talking about employment in the city of Detroit and different supports in the city of Detroit. So I think that it would be a good time to talk about the Office of Disability Affairs within city government. They just opened up in February of this year. So it's within the CREO department, which is Civil Rights and Inclusion Opportunity. So if anyone, in the audience would like to find out information about accessible housing, about any employment opportunities, understand that they're working on job fairs, you can contact the office within city government on Jefferson and Woodward, and to get more information. And we're very proud of that and happy about that. We advocated for that with my partner over here, Marguerite Maddox, and Scarlett. She's gonna pick her head in too. Yeah, Scarlett. She's got a service dog.
Hey,
Scarlett.
Who are you? Who is the person behind you?
That's Marguerite Maddox.
Hi, Marguerite. How are you?
We good.
Good.
You. Yeah, that's my buddy. She's on the board too, and we've tag team and fought for the entire 12 years that we've been together. So, yeah. So, okay, Catherine. I'm sorry. Oh.
No, that was a great thing to bring up. And I guess we may be able to end on one question. This is from a student asking about how to advocate for better mental health understanding. And this is in the context of professors maybe not understanding that mental health is a reason to provide an accommodation within a classroom for learning.
I mean, I would like to, we can't have a dialogue, which is one of the problems with Zoom, but I don't know what your disability affairs office is doing, but certainly this is something that they should be doing, which is working when these kinds of issues are coming up, you know, helping you address them, but also proactively between the president's office and the various provost's offices, they should know about issues that you're facing with faculty. And they should understand what the law is. They need to understand what their obligations are, and they shouldn't make it difficult for you. Now, if you're asking for accommodations that may be beyond the typical accommodations, making sure that they understand why you're getting them, how you need them, and to be able to talk with them about what you may need to do in order to effectively participate in the class. But it should be a partnership relationship, not one which is adversarial.
I'd like to ask you, Judy, about accessible, affordable housing and getting developers to understand. And do you like the word universal?
Yes.
Okay, universal design. Okay.
I love that word.
Okay, just making sure. But yeah, that is something that we've been working on for quite some time. What do you recommend, even for the School of Social Work, how we can get developers involved in understanding what a benefit a universal design could be to a community, to the world? I mean, really.
I think you should be looking within the state or outside of the state on people that are doing good work in the area of development and universal design and housing. And there are plenty of people out there that are doing good work. A friend of mine in St. Louis, Colleen Starkloff, been very involved with this. There are people in Massachusetts, the U.S. Access Board. So offline, I'd be happy to give you some names of people.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sure there are people in Michigan.
Yeah. Someone gave me one resource, but I was just surprised that I could only find one resource.
That's
no, it's not good. So we're working in that area. I'll talk to you more about it.
Okay.
Catherine, got a couple more minutes.
Sure. So this question is, can you share some thinking on the importance of inclusion and interdependence as fundamental to our entire culture?
As what?
As fundamental to our culture.
Yeah, I mean, belonging is very important. Inclusion is, I think, something we are looking to have because we want to be seen as valuable members of our community. And we know that that doesn't happen for many people. So I think we're needing to look at what the obstacles are, what the barriers are, what changes have been made, because I feel like we wind up obviously having discussions about what has not yet happened. But I think it's also important to look at what has happened in the area of deinstitutionalization, in the area of community living, in the area of independent living, even in the area of unemployment, although the numbers are still nowhere near where we want them to be. But we need to look at how those changes came about. And then I think, it needs to be conversations within communities about where more do we need to go? And how can we work collaboratively together to make these changes happen? And I think, some of the things that Lisa was discussing before, around the insurance issue, allowing people to understand the adverse effect of what's going on will maybe get more people involved, although it's pretty terrible that it's already in effect.
Yeah, it is. I see you, Professor Kubek. Can I ask one more quick question? What is a single piece of advice that you would give allies to join in and support disability justice?
Thank you.
Listen, learn, cooperate, and help advance the changes people are looking for.
Awesome. Awesome.
What a powerful discussion. I can't thank you enough, Judy, Lisa, Catherine, and to our interpreters. Thank you so very much. I've learned so much, but also I think that other things have been reinforced. And I think what was reinforced so clearly for me throughout this presentation is that advocacy and systems change is not easy, right? It takes a lot of time and work and sometimes suffering, as you've clearly articulated and we saw in those clips, but it's possible. And I hope everyone felt very encouraged by that. I also think the second reinforced idea was that collectively we are much stronger than we are individually. We need to collaborate and coordinate to ensure that we live our values. And so I really appreciate you bringing those points home to all of us. I am very grateful to our audience for being here and want to remind you that March 4th, we have the third installation of this Disability Justice series. And on March 4th, our own Sharon Milberger from the Developmental Disabilities Institute here at Wayne will moderate a discussion of Detroit activists in the disability justice arena. So please join us then and look for it on the website, wayne.edu/disabilityjustice. So thank you to everyone who made this possible. I'm very grateful for all the work behind the scenes that it took to get this together. And again, thank you, Judy, Lisa, Catherine. It's been really rewarding.
Lisa, reach out. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciated this.
Thank you so much.
The work that led up to today and today.
Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely.